Yeah, well, okay. So should I intro it and then?
What's the topic now?
I think stretching.
Okay.
Okay. So they do even look at the camera. Camera's not there. It's actually a discussion.
Yeah. That's one thing to do. I was thinking about it. Should we look at the camera or not?
No. I think it's it ends up being.
Well, they are witnessing our discussion.
Yes.
We are not discussing for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So normally when the guys do these things, they look at the mic, they look at each other, like stare off into space.
Just think about all the good stuff.
Yeah. Well, we can watch it later and see how we go.
Yeah.
So cool, guys. It's Tony Paladin. Welcome to our very first actual podcast, and we're going to wing this one and see how it goes. So today, Sartorius and I are going to be speaking a little bit about some interesting stuff. Stretching gets asked a lot, and I think we're just going to throw some ideas around and see what we come up with. So Simon, you had a question about stretching, so let me know what your...
So my actual question is, because you're always starting with your clients, you always start with the stretching before the actual session, most of the time. Depends on the client, but most of the time you have like your 5 stretches to do with them, then you start the session. I just want to know what's your general idea behind that.
So generally, if you were to really look at stretching, flexibility, mobility, range of motion, so my understanding would be that it needs to be controlled through movement. So just to get down to the base level of what my actual opinion on stretching is that it should be good movement utilized through activity, or good mobility utilized through activity. So for example, if you're going to be doing a squat or a deadlift or a bent over row or a pull-up, or walking or running, it should be that each and every joint is working through its optimal range of motion, and that the muscles are strong throughout that range of motion. So that would be my ideal want in any client, and in terms of any person that's undergoing rehab. So generally, from a session conduct perspective, I do like to do some stretching prior to the session, and I guess my real reason for that is, number one, it gives me a little bit of time to actually speak to the client. So when they're exercising, they're really needing to concentrate on what they're doing. So I don't always feel that they're giving me the right feedback. So I like to start with some light stretching, have a brief discussion, see where they're at, and then from there we pretty much progress on the session. The second reason I do like doing the stretches is I kind of like to feel that they are more or less on the benchmarks or the baselines as to where they should be. So the level of stretch I like to use is not extremely heavy, bearing in mind they haven't yet warmed up. So generally I'll take the joint just through its range of motion. So maybe do we call that stretching or do we call that mobility? So maybe I push the mobility side of things a little bit more than the flexibility in the beginning part of the session before we start actually exercising and the client's still cold. So by definition of mobility, I would then want to push the joint throughout its range of motion, but not go heavily into end range. So when you're stretching somebody, especially as a therapist stretching somebody else, you can feel where the end range is. Now, a healthy joint's got it's quite a big end range, and it's a nice pliable elastic end range. A restricted joint or with a joint dysfunction, you'll find that the end range is hard. It's kind of like a brick wall. So I generally like to work up to the initial part of end range, and that's kind of as far as I want to get. And then I normally just progress onto some PNF stretching and some activation release, so get them to work against me, push the joints a little bit further. But the main reason would be to get everything moving optimally prior to the start of the session, and also to allow for some general discussion as to what we're about to do.
Okay, one quick question that just popped up. What is your definition of mobility and what is your definition of flexibility?
So these probably need to be
clarified
from a dictionary definition perspective. In my opinion, or my understanding of mobility, gives the impression that it is controlled. So if a joint is mobile, it can be controlled through the musculature through a range of motion. If a joint is flexible, it gives the impression that it doesn't necessarily need to be controlled. So the joint could be lax. So we could have hyperlaxity, and that could potentially be a flexible joint, whereas mobility, even if you've got a joint that's lax, the joint won't fall into laxity or hyperflexibility because of the fact that the musculature is strong enough to control it throughout its ideal range of motion. So that's my best answer to that question.
And for me, mobility is like flexibility with strength. So you're actively using the flexibility you have and control your flexibility. And flexibility can also be a little bit more passive. For example, I can speak for gymnastics right now. Or maybe you can speak from your wife in terms of ballet dancers. A lot of female, they can actually go easily into a split, but they don't have the strength to hold the split actively.
Yes.
So flexibility would be I can go in the split, but the mobility would be I can actively enter the split without using gravity with my muscles or something.
Yeah, look, my feeling is that raw flexibility is quite dangerous. I think if you are overly flexible without the control, the risk of injury becomes significantly more. So I think it's important to promote that with clients. I think going back to the original question is when I start to stretch with somebody at the beginning of the session, I don't like to overly push those movements. Bearing in mind we're also dealing a lot with office workers a lot of the time and not necessarily with athletes. So generally stretching your office worker is really just relieving muscles that are tight from stress. So often an office worker will come, the body's tight, there's a lot of tension in it. They've also been sitting in a chair the whole day, so muscles have almost contracted into a shortened state. I think this could bring on another discussion just in terms of flexibility. When you've got a body that's fairly relaxed and it's almost like let's use the word flexibility, the end range of those muscles, they can get there a lot quicker. So you potentially run the risk of damaging. If you push an athlete with a fairly relaxed body into a hyper-flexible position, you can potentially cause damage. Whereas a person who's relatively sedentary and their muscles, their set point is a lot shorter, but it's not a true definition of the length of the muscle. It's actually the muscle is shortened through overactivation. It's activated possibly through elevated cortisol and increased stimulus. So often just stretching those muscles just returns them to a baseline of length. From there, where you can start working into a more flexible position. I had this discussion once with a powerlifter, and he was fairly nervous about creating flexibility, which I kind of understand, but me trying to explain mobility was a case of I think you do need to stretch tight muscles, tight muscles that have become tight through stress or exercise to a degree to alleviate them. Once they're at an ideal set point, if you really want to start increasing, let's use the word flexibility, ideally the mobility, that needs to be done more actively by your participant.
Maybe we can dive into more how do you create flexibility? Because I know there are quite different strategies out there, a lot of different strategies. And my question is how do you create flexibility? Because I got new ideas about that, how you create actually flexibility or / mobility, because I think they quite go hand in hand, and I think you want to shoot for the mobility because you want to actively use your range of motion. So what do you think? How do we create flexibility in a person, in a client, in an athlete? I don't know, doesn't matter, any human being.
Well, I think firstly it would be good to clarify in terms of creating flexibility, are we creating functional flexibility for an average person, or are you creating, I don't want to use the word hyper flexibility, but increased flexibility for ballet, for gymnastics?
Let's just go for the average Joe.
I think that the person has to be able to get into a starting position to actually be able to get mobile. So if somebody's excessively tight, they do need some pushing and some hand holding. And I sometimes think there does need to be a relative amount of eccentric loading on the muscles. I mean, the muscles do, to a degree, have to be broken down, or almost the creation of micro tearing through eccentric exercise, and then using those muscles in elongated positions. This is based on the assumption that the muscles are already at an optimal length, so that they're not shortened through excessive use or through fatigue or through stress or through tiredness. But the body's relatively, at its set point. You've passively stretched the person out into a comfortable position, and now we actually want to make those muscles, let's say, a lot longer. Because this opens up another whole question, is that are muscles actually shorter than others, or are they just being told by the brain that they are shorter than, that they are in a shortened position? To me, it's a question of both, and I think would be good to clarify what I was saying earlier is overactivation, tension, stress, and excessive exercise fatigue are going to cause excessive neuromotor loading on the body, which can potentially cause muscles to be in a perceived shortened position. So I think when that's out the way, then you can actually proceed to make muscles longer. But at that stage, in terms of making muscles longer, it becomes a more physical, it happens more at a physical or physiological level. The muscle actually has to become longer.
Yeah, I think the problem is that a lot of people assume when you're stretching that you stretch the muscle you have. But I think the muscle, that goes to another topic, but I think the muscle is just as long as it's been used. So, for example, when you have like an old guy who was sitting his whole life.
What's old?
let's go for
careful.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go for a 70-year-old grandpa. And
you might have some 70-year-olds taking offense to that.
Okay.
Let's say it's a 110-year-old.
Yes. Someone really old. And now you see he can't really get his hands above his head. But why? Because when we look at the physiological level, the micro level of the body, he never used the range of motion. So his body adapted to the point where his muscle becomes shortened because he doesn't use the range of motion. And I think when you're going to train again, so there's a study by, I think he's called Brett Schoenfeld. He's a bodybuilder, and he made a lot of studies about muscle growth. And he found out that muscles, so we think like a typical bodybuilder, when he trains, the muscle just grows bigger and bigger, like biceps. The muscles also can grow in a vertical way, but also in length. The muscle fibers just etch to each other.
Okay.
So what you're doing when you're training for mobility or flexibility, you're giving the body the stimulus to grow that muscle into length, because now you're using that range of motion. To go back to the older guy, the grandpa, who can't really get his hands above his head anymore. So I think for me, what changed for me in the past couple of years is that flexibility or mobility always needs an active strength component, because you want to get a stimulus for the body to actually grow into it. But because I don't think that you can get a muscle longer, because how do I say that? That doesn't sound stupid.
Are we making the muscle fibers longer, or are we just adding more muscle fibers onto the end?
I think that the muscle fiber can't get longer at any point, otherwise it would rupture.
Yes.
But what we are doing is adding more muscle fibers, and we are not getting the muscle fiber from 5 centimeters to 10 centimeters for an example. Really bad example. But yeah, I think what we want to do is build up on the stimulus of getting length to the body or the muscle, and then we can actively get into the flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, I think it very much boils down to the use it or lose it principle.
Yeah.
You know, if you're doing something regularly, you basically will become what you do, and I think it is, you know, the subject of flexibility is really important in the bulk of the population today. Sitting in positions like chairs, at desks, in front of laptops, on smartphones, you shortening structures that
your body adapts to that environment.
Very, very, very much so. And
I think that's a whole other discussion.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's the whole thing of standing desks and all of that. And, you know, we'll have another discussion about just how we've created an artificial world around us that's basically promoted a loss of movement and a loss of flexibility. But I think just getting back to creating flexibility, it's important to note that if you haven't done something for a very long period of time and to suddenly start doing it aggressively again carries the risk of injury. So you almost need to, going back to what I said earlier, is try and passively stretch the muscles into the most relaxed state, and once they are at that level, is then to start increasing the flexibility through, or increasing the flexibility, but through mobility work. So are you making those muscles longer, but with control, and starting to do exercises that incorporate the flexibility in them. So rather, again, the very big move to functional exercise. The more functional the exercise, the more optimal it is, and the more mobility you're probably going to achieve, as opposed to doing machine-based, non-functional exercises.
Can I just ask a question that I'm also struggling with right now? What is a functional exercise?
A functional exercise is, I believe, something that would incorporate optimal, pure human movement, something that would get done on a relatively day-to-day basis. Example would be a deadlift is a functional exercise. You pick up things on a daily basis. That is a functional exercise. Something like a leg extension that is totally machine-based with a controlled hinge is a non-functional exercise. So perhaps to just take a step further, this is a little bit of a blanket, throwing a blanket over it, or having a gunshot approach, because it's not 100% true, but generally a closed kinetic chain exercise is going to be a more functional exercise than an open kinetic chain exercise, for the most part. You know, if you are able to efficiently move your body around a point, or to move the proximal segment around the distal segment, so if you're able to fix your foot and move your body around that, or you're able to fix your hand and move your body around that, that generally is going to become slightly more functional movements, as opposed to fixing the body and then moving something around that. Now, most movements are a combination of both. You know, if you can take throwing, if you throw something, so if you're a shot putter or a javelin thrower, I mean, there's a combination of closed kinetic chain and open kinetic chain. So, like I said, it's not fully true with regards to closed kinetic chain being functional and open kinetic chain being non-functional, but for the most part, there are activities that get done on a regular enough day-to-day basis.
I think I have my problem right now with functional exercise, because everybody's like, you need to do functional exercise, that's better than
non-functional exercise.
Non-functional. But what is the difference? So functional exercise is always prescribed like it's close to human movement, but what is human movement? That's another discussion we could have. But I mean, when you have like someone who recently, or for example, we take the leg extension, that could also be a functional exercise, because you're getting the body into the state of being functional again. You know what I mean?
I would consider that more of a rehab-based exercise.
Yeah, but what is the point of rehab? it's to get the body functioning.
For sure. I mean,
Yeah.
I would consider it more basic function.
Yeah,
So a rehabilitation exercise is more basic functioning. It's just getting something basically moving.
yeah, but basic functioning is also functional.
Potentially, maybe the other difference between functional versus non-functional is that functional movements tend to be more complex. So within a body, certain muscles will need to stabilize certain joints,
Sure.
and other muscles will be able to activate around joints.
Yeah.
Whereas a non-functional exercise, you artificially
But-
stabilize joints, and you only activate one muscle, or one group of muscles, or one action.
Yeah.
So just to take the difference between the leg extension and the squat, the leg extension is very limited hamstring and glute activation. They can be mostly passive while the quadricep activates.
Mhm.
But if you flip that to a squat, all of a sudden your glutes and your hamstrings are starting to activate again.
Sure.
Another just on that example is a squat versus a leg press. The squat is probably going to put you in a mechanically better position than the leg press. The leg press could put you in an
Mhm.
artificially inefficient position where it does increase the risk of knee or back injury.
Yeah, but understand where you're going. But when you put, would you describe a squat on a Bosu ball as functional, or like a Petsy ball?
I'd consider that a circus exercise.
Yeah, but that's not functional.
It's non-functional.
So what is functional? I mean, to be functional, you have to have a certain degree of prerequisites functionality in the joints.
For sure.
So yeah, I'm struggling because everybody's talking. You have to do functional exercise, but what is functional? I know that functional should be, it's like the basic human movement. What is basic human movement? Everybody is like, you need to do functional exercise. We do functional exercise. They don't do. So we are better. But
The poor bodybuilders get
Yeah.
pushed in a corner.
yeah, I mean, that's also another discussion. Our whole fitness point of view, all our gyms are bodybuilding influenced because they evolved from that.
Yeah.
And now there comes all like the CrossFit gyms, functional exercise.
Now it's all
Yes.
gymnastics and weightlifting.
Yeah, but I mean, is gymnastics functional? To a certain degree, maybe, but bodybuilding is also functional. It gets the job done. You can, function. What is functional?
I mean, maybe another definition of functional versus non-functional is machine-based versus non-machine-based. Machine-based generally is reserved for rehab, people who don't know how to move their body, and bodybuilders.
Yeah.
That's what people use machines for. Generally, the free weight section of the gorilla pit, that's as sometimes we call. There's also a place where it's more, kind of need to know how to move your body because it can be unsafe.
Sure.
So generally, machines are either, as mentioned, rehab because they can isolate an area. They're idiot-proof because you can't really get it that wrong unless you start over pushing it, and then bodybuilding because you can sculpt to a degree. I also just think that my perception of creating a culture around machine-based exercise is impractical. It costs a lot of money, and it's not easy to do. When you're in a hotel room or when you're in a country that maybe doesn't have access to gyms. So I also look at it as a largely practical perspective. And myself as a therapist, when I'm working with a client, I can use no equipment yet still have an extremely effective workout. No equipment, none whatsoever.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it's very nice to have maybe a mat or weight even, but I think maybe I consider those more functional exercises because they mostly free weights and.
But what's functional about them? Why do you call them functional? That's the point I want to understand.
Well, function, I suppose to break it down, means functional capacity. I mean, it's your ability to function.
Yeah, so I assume maybe like a squat. You need the function of a squat is to get you to a point where you can easily get off a chair, stand up again, sit down again. You can get from the toilet. So maybe that's why they call it functional exercise. But on the other hand, so you get better at the exercise that's an exercise that provides a functional background maybe.
There's a movement pattern associated with it that's relevant.
Yeah.
So a squat, a sit to stand is something that you do on a day-to-day. Let's say it's something that you do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
You don't do a leg press or a leg extension on a day-to-day
but
basis.
the person who does a leg press on a day-to-day basis, because it's training, then they would be also called functional.
But functional at what? What are they functional at?
At getting better at leg press. I mean, you squat to get better at squatting down and up.
I think you do. Well, yes. I mean, if you're pushing your squat, but
Yeah.
I would, if I'm working with an 88-year-old patient, post-knee replacement patient, we will do squat-based exercise so that she can get off the toilet.
Yeah.
I don't personally see the necessity in making her do a leg extension.
Yeah, that's true.
Or a leg press. So maybe my perception as a therapist is I'm wanting to make her more functional at life.
Yeah.
So I think.
But I think it's the point why I'm arguing so much about it. I think there's a lot of, it's kind of misused, the word functional, because it's like it's used as an advertisement to maybe stand out of the rest of the field and just I do functional exercise. But
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a natural evolution. I mean, why do people consume? Why is the supplement industry so huge? I mean, people will neglect their diets, yet cram the body full of supplements. I mean, again, it's not really addressing the primary issue it had. Whereas I think the movement into functional based exercise and the understanding of functional exercise is possibly better than more sort of artificial based exercise. So I think the fact that someone can do a function, let's say whatever the functional exercise is, they can do this exercise with limited equipment. So it gives people more access to exercise. There's a more of an access to exercise potentially through being able to just move. I mean, this all boils down to basic movement at the end of the day.
Yeah, but also leg extension, to extend your leg is also basic movement because you need that to do a squat.
Maybe it goes back to the starting point. I don't know whether, you could, I mean, take someone who's dysfunctional, so someone who's been paralyzed and there's been some nerve regeneration and they are relearning to walk. I mean, at what point do you start? Do you start with that person doing a leg extension or do you start doing a supported squat? I mean, I would personally push more to the supported squat because you're working, it's more gross motor, you're training a motor pattern and you're also using supporting muscles. So you're not only focusing on, say, a quadricep, we are now focusing on glutes, hamstrings.
Yeah, we've been working the whole chain.
We're working the whole chain.
Totally agree. But it's just the term functional. I mean, every movement is in some way functional.
I'd be curious to see what other people think about this. I'd be keen to listen to some comments, and I think we should probably wrap it for today because
a little about stretching at the end.
I don't want to bore people to death.
Yeah. No,
cool.
it's
Anyway,
fine.
yeah, thanks. That is
Well,
cool chat. I enjoyed that.